very lucky on that.
Well, unlike me, 32 and a half years active service,
Yeah,
overseas many times.
yeah.
So,
And
but
you retired as Major General, is that?
yeah,
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, you definitely had a very distinguished career, that's for sure. World War II at the end, and through Vietnam, a lot of combat experience.
yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed it was. But I enjoyed it. There were, some few tight moments along the way, but
Oh, yeah. Oh, my
I
God.
enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yep, I think I still have a copy of it.
Oh, okay.
You gave me, but that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about your early career. You went into the service at pretty much the end of World War II, 1944,
Well,
was it?
Yeah, it was near the end. Of course, I wanted to go in as the Aviation Cadet Program
Mm-hmm.
training. In those days, they would accept high school graduates. So I came out of high school, and I was 17 when I graduated high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to wait a little bit, and it's funny, but in those days, to go into that program, I needed my parents' consent.
Hmm.
And I've tried to understand why that was, but back then, I don't have any recollection of why.
Yeah.
Who had to get a parent's consent to go into service when World War II was running. But anyway, of course, mother obviously was reluctant to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I turned 18, of course, and I said, well, have to come up and register for the draft, and then I'll go and try and be a good infantry soldier. So of course, they relented. And so it was a great thing, and you can imagine how impressionable you are at that age to all of a sudden enter into a very well-structured society, and the discipline that comes with it, and then the camaraderie that you develop, and then something as exciting as flying. And I'd never been off the ground before. So that had a tremendous impression, and I fell in love with flying. First time I lifted off in an airplane, I laughed, leaving the ground. And it's something I wanted to do. But when the war ended, and you know that my history, I had a little time in prison camp. I knocked down attacking an airfield, but when I came back, I realized that if I opted to try and stay in the service, that I knew that I really had little opportunity to compete with the regular officers, the West Pointers and so forth, or college graduates. And I knew I had to get out and do what I wanted to anyways, to go out and go to school, which I did. And so I wasn't sure what I would do when I finished college, but the Korean War came on, and I was with an organized reserve unit at Mitchell Field in New York, on Long Island. And I guess it was some number of months before I were to graduate, we got the notice that we were going to be activated. It was a troop carrier wing. And they had all C-46s, World War II type transports. And so I got a delay in reporting to duty. I took my final exams, and I was only 28 days late in reporting when the wing was called up. And so I came back on active duty, and then rolled on from there. And I did apply for a regular commission. That would make up my mind. If I got it, I stay. If I don't, I have options. So I stayed on, and of course, a career followed.
All right. Yeah, sort of similar with me. It's like I went in. I was thinking about making a career out of it, and it's like if you're going to make a career, you got to be an officer. And I passed all the tests and stuff, but they refused to allow me because of my eyesight. I got a waiver to get in the enlisted, and they wouldn't give me a waiver for officers. So.
Oh yeah, that was a wonderful thing too, because I saw young men just like myself, but because of some problem, eyes or something that disqualified them from even getting into the program. So I've often, from that day to this, I've always been eternally grateful to my parents.
Yes. All right. Well, what led you to test flying?
Well, my intensity for how I felt about flight had me naturally gravitate to that thought when I found out about a test pilot school. And I decided that I'd like to try for that. And so I did. I applied and was accepted. I'm cutting things short because we could be here all night. But, and I'm thinking, in fact, I've gotten started on an autobiography, so that's going to take a while. And then, of course, the thing is and I have a fellow who's got some experience in the book world. But the thing is to find a publisher. But that remains to be seen. That's well down the road yet.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so I did apply, and I was accepted, and it rolled on from there. I was fortunate in being able to be selected to stay at Edwards because, the class graduates and there are a number of places you can go for that duty. And of course, the obvious place for, the place was the Flight Test Center at Edwards. And I did get there. And then the career followed. And, there's the ups and downs in it. Back in those days, it was a very dangerous business compared to what it is today because of the tremendous growth in technology. And as I read somewhere recently, when a pilot flies the first flight in a new fighter, say, it's almost like he's flown it before because of the simulators, and they can go ahead and put in all the parameters so that you're familiar with all the aerodynamic qualities of the airplane and so forth. So it's a much safer business, thank goodness. And then I went on and, of course, had my career that saw me at the right place in the right time to be able to participate in the X-15 program.
Now, you graduated like 1954 from the test pilot school?
My class graduated, we were 54B, so we graduated right at the end of 1954. So we started at the Flight Test Center in 1955.
Okay. So what was the first programs that you got involved with after getting
Okay, well, you're a fledgling, so they kind of bring you along and see how you progress. And I started with an F-86K. Now this was a version of the F-86D, which was an all-weather fighter interceptor. And it would take the aircraft on a perpendicular run. It wasn't a pursuit curve, like you come enemy here. But you'd intercept. The computer would generate the symbology, and then you'd follow this, and it would bring you on an intercept course. And then when he fired the rockets, hopefully they would meet the enemy at the same time. And so the F-86K, but that was going to be a sale to the Italian Air Force off. So they didn't have that computer in, so it had to be, with guns, no rockets, but guns on an old pursuit curve course, and doing that on the radar scope at night is kind of interesting. But anyway, that was a fledgling program. And then came an F-89H. And that was an advanced version of an earlier F-89, whether it was the whatever model, that fired all these rockets from wing pods. But in this case, they had Falcon missiles, 3 in the pod on each wing. And so it was an updated version, and not a very exciting program. The aerodynamics, the airplane was the airplane. It had been flown and checked and all that sort of stuff. So it was really the fire control systems that were different. And then, of course, I was getting to fly all the different airplanes and, do a little sporadic work here and there. And then I got into the F-102. Now that was a new all-weather interceptor, and so I got a lot of time doing that. And I also did what we call Phase 6 back then, which just keep flying the airplane, looking for system breakdowns and so forth, so the Air Force can develop a scheme on replacement parts and so forth. Mean time between failure, as they used to say, and also I did the stability and control tests on the F-102. And then the next one was I got the crack to do the first formal Air Force test of an F-105. It was the B model. And that was very interesting because here you're the lead pilot here for the Air Force. So a couple of guys had flown it, just some flights, but now it's a formal testing. And so by this time, with the knowledge you've developed and looking at a lot of different airplanes, cockpits, displays, switchology, and the rest of it, you can go ahead though with some degree of sophistication in evaluating the cockpits. And there was a lot to be wrong with that cockpit. And then with the aerodynamics of the airplane. So the report was a decent report in the respect that to say that it had potential for being a good fighter bomber, and it was going to be one that would carry an atomic weapon. And so that was the first production model, but then they had to make a lot of changes, and they came out with the F-105D, and that was a very good airplane, and I got to fly it because I ended up in Europe as a squadron commander of an F-105D squadron. And I could see all the things that were different and changed and so forth, and it was a good feeling because I knew that I had a part in helping do that. And again, today, I think the young fellows doing, and gals doing the kind of testing today would think that's pretty rudimentary stuff because the cockpits are pretty well standardized today, and they have what they call these glass cockpits and so forth. So the technology has just gone zoom. And I looked at one recently, a cockpit, a private airplane, a retired airline pilot friend of mine here. And so he showed me the display, powered it up. And I'll tell you what, you have that kind of equipment today, and it's easy. Just take the airplane off the ground, and then you set it up, and it'll fly itself all the way there. And it's interesting. He told me that some of the airline pilots, prefer to fly not the very latest and biggest equipment, maybe some of the older stuff, because they get to do more hands-on flying, which is, of course, what a pilot likes to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the advances in technology, just absolutely wonderful. And the electrical engineering part of it. I remember when I was going to school, we had an electrical engineering professor, and he said, he says, let me tell you fellas something. He says, someday electrical engineers are going to be able to do almost anything. And he was prophetic, and it's come to pass, really.
Yeah. That was handy that you were on the F-105. That's what you flew in Vietnam, right?
And then, of course, I went over there, and
that was after the X-15.
Oh yes, that was after the X-15. Yeah, and I did a tour there.
Was that also the D model that you were flying there?
Yes, also the D model, and we were. And I had a lot of my, former friends. When in fact, I commanded 2 different squadrons, one, and then they jumped me to another one because there was some personnel changes and so forth. So, but then I went over there and met a lot of old friends. But we were taking the big hits, the F-4s and the F-105s, going into North Vietnam. Now, I don't denigrate the fellows that were flying down south. They were helping whatever they did for the troops, right there in country, fighting on the ground. But any loss rate in South Vietnam was practically nil compared to what was going on in the north, because there we were facing heavy anti-aircraft fire, the 88 millimeters and the missiles, the anti-aircraft missile. So. And indeed, it's a little anecdote to that story. When I finished, what the scheme was there, if you did 100 combat missions, then the pilot completed his tour and he was able to leave and go back home. As a full colonel, no matter what I did, it was 1 year. But I only did 70 because a gentleman who was handling the war in the 7th Air Force headquarters was leaving. And so the commanding general there pointed the finger at me to come down and take his place. I resisted, but to no avail. And I did go down there. And in fact, with some thoughts that, well, maybe I'm gonna help straighten out this situation, because we weren't bombing the targets that we thought we should be bombing. But when I got there, the reality was that our military commanders were not selecting the targets. They had no authority to do so. The Secretary of Defense, by the name of Robert McNamara, was making all those decisions. So when I finished my time there, I was very happy to leave. And the base commander at Tan Son Nhut, where the headquarters were, right outside of Saigon, he drove me out to the air. He said, "Bob, you don't have to go through ops, you know," and the crowd said, "Come on, I'll get you. You can get on the airplane." And so he was nice and drove me to the... And I stood at the bottom of that stairway leading up into that World Airways transport, and I looked up and I said, "Thank you," because, you know, I knew what would have been at the end of the trail had I gone down. And I had some of my old comrades tell me when they came back, they said, "Oh yeah, they would have loved to have seen you."
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But anyway, so that was that, and then on I went with my career.
Yeah. Did you have friends over there that ended up like in POW camps and stuff?
Oh yes, yes. I remember some of the pilots that were in my squadron in Germany. One who was who I admired very much. He was a very fine man, and he was an ace. He had shot down 5 MiGs in the Korean War. His name was Jim Kassler, and in fact he has a book that was published, and it was, I think the name of the book was Tempered Steel, because no matter how hard they beat on this guy, he never gave in.
Yeah.
And wonderful guy. What to me, a great American.
Yeah.
But and a few others, of course, that I know, and some that were shot down out of my my group when I was leading. I always led the wing north when I flew, and people would be shot out of that. Maybe it was just over here or back there.
Yeah, a whole different experience, I'm sure, than what you went through in World War II in Germany.
Yes, it was quite different, obviously, because
you was treated well when you were in the camp.
Yeah, the Germans were the only problem they had there, and I was there just for a few months at the end of the war, was really because of us. We're gunning their trains down and everything else, blowing up anything we saw that moved, and had a free reign on that, no restrictions. This is what war was all about, and so for a while there in the prison camp, the only thing that was a problem was food. And for a couple of weeks, we were down to very bare minimum rations. Not even worth mentioning. So, but the night, this one night, after about a couple of weeks, on one piece of bread and a bean can of grass soup a day, we were in compounds, separate compounds, and our compound was one large barracks building, no furniture except one kind of picnic table and a couple of benches and a potbelly stove. There was 139 officers, and the senior officer was a Canadian major. And he said this one night, he said, "Well," he says, "I guess the only thing we have left is to pray." And it's one of my favorite stories because, as I say, I don't doubt that there was 139 messages that went upstairs. And would you believe this? The next morning, all of a sudden we heard this sound of what sounded very much like General Motors trucks rolling into the camp with big covers over them with Red Cross painted on the side. And there was trucks that had been driven up from Switzerland carrying prisoner of war food parcels. And indeed, that was a lifesaver.
Oh, I'm sure. Were the Germans still there at the time? I heard someplace where they just disappeared.
No, they were still there. And but these were not American. They were Swiss that were bringing the trucks up.
Okay.
And then it wasn't too long afterwards we evacuated the camp. This was near Nuremberg, Germany. and moved down to a camp further south. In other words, they were evacuating us, and it was coincidental with the fact that a few of the prisoners saying, listen, listen, and you could start to hear the sound of artillery. It was well off in the distance, but there it was, and of course, our spirits were high, and we were hurting when the rations were almost to the point of starvation, because we knew that we were going to win the battle, and we knew that it couldn't be that far away. So as soon as we heard that heartening sound of artillery, that next day we moved out and marched to a prison camp not far from Munich in Germany. And it was there that the Germans, I think, abandoned the camp when the gunfire started and so forth, and we liberated.
Yeah. Well, let me make sure everything's up and running properly here. Oh yeah, okay. Well, go back to your time at Edwards now. You were at Edwards for a few years doing these test programs and such. When did you first hear about the X-15 coming down the pike?
Well, one of my good friends, Ivan Kinchlow, he started talking about it. So we were aware, of course, that it was coming on. And indeed, it was a joint program. The NASA, from the old NACA, NASA, and the Air Force were working quite closely together on it. The scheme was that the Air Force was going to provide the funding for the program. NASA would be involved, this is what you well know from all the material that you have available, and they would be responsible for the conduct of the program. But the joint aspect then was that and however this happened in the hierarchy, the Air Force said, well, you know, we think that we should be integrated down at the pilot level too. And of course, Scott Crossfield felt it would be nice if he did as the contractor pilot to go on. But anyway, the scheme worked out this way, and Ivan Kinchlow was designated to be and he had done some flying on the X-2, so he had some experience there. And he was to be the lead Air Force pilot, and I was designated to be his backup. And so, you know, we were aware that as the program was advancing, it was still in early stages, construction and so forth. And then, of course, the time came when Ivan lost his life, and then the Air Force pushed me into the catbird seat as I was the backup, and that's the way it went. It turned out to be a very good thing. I know in the early days of the X-1, there was a lot of controversy. You've heard stories about Chuck Yeager and the NACA and all this sort of business. Well, I can understand. I was not a part of it. I had nothing to do with those. In fact, I was still in college when that was going on.
Yeah.
But I can understand what happened, because when the Bell Aircraft Company could not get the Air Force in a contractual agreement to add I think it was $25,000 as a bonus for Slick Goodland, the Bell pilot, to be the one to try and broach the Mach 1. And I think Slick Goodland probably took a bad rap on that. Not that he wanted the $25,000, as I understand, it's that the company wanted. But then the Air Force said, okay, fine, you know, we'll do it. And so Charlie Yeager was a test pilot at Wright-Patterson. This would be before they had a permanent detachment at Edwards. Pilots used to rotate from Wright-Patterson to Edwards. And he was designated to be the Air Force pilot. Bob Hoover as his backup. And I think you know all this, I'm sure. And so anyhow, you can see there was probably a little bit of tension, you know. NACA is responsible for the conduct. They're getting the data, they're reducing the data. And like the stories come out, Chuck felt that they were a little bit too hesitant to get the next tenth of a Mach number, whatever. Anyway, that was all different. You see, so the whole scheme was we integrated right from the beginning. So I got to know the NASA pilots, you know, chatted with them, and then the engineers I work with, the two primary engineers I work with, Bob Hoy and, tell me his name.
Vincent Faso, maybe?
No.
I think he was later.
Dick Day.
Oh, okay.
So so now Dick Day he was a NASA engineer, and Bob Hoy was an engineer with the Air Force.
Right.
And they were good, they were buddies.
Yeah.
I mean, they were buddies. And so we worked very well together. So it was that way right from the beginning. And this before the airplane ever even got off the ground.
Mhm.
And working on the simulator. Now, particularly with these two guys on the simulations. So it was that kind of a thing, and there was no jockeying for position or any of that. And if somebody thought there was, and well, they could think that, it wasn't the case. And NASA was perfectly agreeable in seeing Joe and I, leapfrog and opening up the flight envelope. It was going to be our responsibility to open up the flight envelope. Scott, of course, was had to demonstrate that the systems and everything were functional, and there were no, flaws that had to be corrected before it was turned over to the government. Again, everything, all this, so. And then we went on from there, and it was, it worked very well.
Now, what about the Navy participation in the program?
Okay, well, the Navy, they did, I forget some of these working groups they had that, in the establishing the genesis of the program, and then the government now coming on board. And so the Navy was a participant. In fact, you know from all the literature, there even were some design considerations because the Navy wanted an engineer on board, so there would be a two-place, and that never materialized. So there was a participation, and so a naval officer was assigned. And, he was in his nice white uniform there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Forrest Peterson.
Yeah.
And he was a great guy. I liked him very much, and we got along great. And I remember one time we're riding in a car into town. There was going to be a SCTP meeting in Lancaster, and so I was asking him some questions about what from here, then what, where would you go, and so forth. And then what any chances of busting through the top and so forth. He said, well, yeah, in the Navy, he says, and it was at this time, now I'm not exhibiting any prejudice on the part of for me of the Navy, but to break through that ceiling, it was almost imperative, except for some special, like a medical officer or a lawyer, that you be a Naval Academy graduate. And of course, I think that's long gone, just like it has been long gone in the military that, general officers only come out of West Point or the Air Force Academy. So, and indeed, he went on. I guess, I don't know, he participated, he did about, I forget how many flights, 6, 7, 8, 9 flights.
It was 7.
Yeah, something like that. And then I'm sure that the Navy said, okay, Forrest, great, you presented the Navy image in a big program like this, here we are, standing with the president and in the Rose Garden and so forth, which was great. And so I assume that the Navy then decided, okay, Forrest, now you're going. He became a squadron commander, and then moved on from there. Yeah. And the last time I saw him was at one of the reunions. And so, you see, the program was a different thing from the early days. It was completely a different, the genre, the setup was completely different. So if I do that, and if Chuck were here and I say, hey Charlie, it just worked different, he probably would agree with me. Yeah. Although he certainly has his prejudices for his own reasons. Oh, yeah. I'm not going to badmouth it, but that's it. Yeah. But this was different, and it worked very, very well. Yeah. And to this day, reunions, and then at the last, you saw that the reunion there in California with the Wings presentation. Right. No, they didn't care whether, a retired General Bob White was there, and there was a NASA president. It was fine. It was part of the team.
Yeah, it was all seamless and stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the one thing that when I talked to Forrest many years ago, he had told me that, yeah, it was time for him to move on. If he wanted to continue his career, he had to make a choice.
Right.
And so he went on. But now he said that the Navy, because I asked him, well, why didn't the Navy continue? Why didn't we get a replacement pilot for him? Now, he said there was a replacement pilot sent out to Edwards.
That's the first time I have ever heard
Oh, yeah?
any such thing.
Well, he said that the story that he told me was simply that the Navy came in there and they sent a guy out to Edwards, and that NASA and the Air Force got wind from the Navy that basically what they were planning to do was start rotating NASA or Navy pilots in there just to get this little check mark in this rocket plane and then take them back out. And NASA and the Air Force didn't like that, because it's like that's not what this program is about. And the Navy was sort of asked not to participate anymore that way. And apparently the poor guy got sent home. He was caught in the middle of the politics and stuff.
Well, if that's the case, and I don't doubt that it is because you say so, then I am glad it was beyond me. I had no idea whatsoever until you mentioned it right now.
Yeah.
So
there's only a couple of people. Stan Bouchart's only one of the other people I've talked to that even knew about that happening. But I've still never been able to find out who the guy was. I'd love to talk to the guy. I can imagine what he must have had to go through going out there to Edwards and getting stuck in the middle of that. So someday maybe I'll be able to find his name, but he's probably lost to history. So. Well, as you say, you were good friends with Ivan. You took his place, obviously, after the F-104 crash and stuff. Can you tell me a little bit about him? He's obviously sort of a cipher in this because not too many people know that much about him.
Well, he was an ace in Korea. He shot down 5 airplanes. He was a young lieutenant, so his star shone brightly very early on, and in fact. He was going through the Empire Test Pilot School. We generally would send an American over, going through the Empires, while I was at the Air Force Test Pilot School. And an anecdote here, he was already tapped to be assigned to Edwards when he finished at the Empire Test Pilot School. Now, in the Air Force Test Pilot School, when we arrived, they told us that we were going to be evaluated on 3 things, and there would be a class standing. How your standing was academically, flying ability, and attitude. And those 3 things would be put together, and there would be a class standing. So, the time came near the end of the class when we would receive our assignment notices, but we were allowed to ask for where we'd like to go. Flight Test Center in those days, among the test pilot group, was a closed society. I mean, if you didn't know someone or have it in, you were not in. So I knew that my chance was like the snowball in the proverbial place downstairs. So I put my assignment, I thought the next best one would be at Eglin Air Force Base, because you're going to do armaments testing, either firing, carrying, dropping, or whatever. And then I put that first, I put Edward second, and Wright-Patterson third, okay? So one day they came in, they said, well, let's pass out our assignment notices. So they come around, a little slip of paper to each one of the guys, and I got my slip of paper, and my assignment was to go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. So a little while later, the commandant of the school came in. And I can't think of his name. But anyway, he came in and he moseyed around. He moseyed over to me and he said, Bob, he says, how do you feel about your assignment? I said, sir, I said, I'm crushed. And he said, oh, he says, tell me. So I told him essentially what I'm telling you. And so he said, well, he says, we told you that we would rate the class by standing. And he says, you finished first. So he says, give me that piece of paper. So I says, gratefully. And I handed it to him. And then I got an appointment to see the full colonel who was head of the entire flight test director. In other words, the support people, the engineers, and the flight test operations. And I spoke with him, and he said, fine. He said, I think you'll be a welcome addition, and go down to flight test ops and see Colonel Everest, your boss. I went down and he was away, he was on some trip or something, and I saw Colonel Russell, and I became very good friends over time. He was a lieutenant colonel, he was a deputy. And chatted just a little bit, and he said, tell me, he says, why do you think you want to serve here? And I said, because I think it would be a privilege to serve here. And he says, that's the right answer. He said, go ahead, go up to fighter ops and meet your boss.
All right.
And that's how that happened.
Right.
That's one of my favorite stories, but, funny little things happen along the way, and there it was.
Yeah. Well, first in the class, if you couldn't get where you wanted to go, I mean,
Yeah.
you certainly deserve to go.
Well,
where
I
you
think that's why the commandant, he nodded his head and said, that doesn't equate. So he
Yeah.
took the paper and made an input for me
Mhm.
to the full colonel
Mhm. about
about this, and said, hey, if we're going to be any good in our word, I suppose, we ought to live up to it. So that was how that happened.
Yeah. Now you were working with Kinch on the X-15 program as a backup pilot.
Yeah, right. It wasn't any hard, serious knockdown stuff, because when the guy lost his life, we were still, the rollout hadn't, they had not had the rollout ceremony.
Yeah, he died in '58, is that right?
I forget.
Something like that, yeah.
Which I remember, Vice President Nixon
Oh.
officiated the
Right, that
rollout.
was, yeah.
So it's, it's a matter of record somewhere.
Oh, yeah, we know the rollout is.
Yeah.
I remember when Kinch.
So, it was so early on that we never got really involved in that stuff. We're still kind of, my workaday world was the thing that I was plugging along at. And it wasn't until after that, really, that then this thing started going along.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time that not the first time that I met Crossfield, because I did meet him at the rollout and maybe a few other times, but where I got to know him a little bit better was before the program really got rolling. I went down to North America. I spent a week there, and I wanted to talk personally with the engineer on each one of the systems. I wanted to get to really know all the systems in great detail, and so I'm going to talk to the guys that designed the system, and that was good too. But that's where you start developing an intensity for a program that is looking way out ahead. There's lots of unknowns, and so the imperative to equip yourself, to the very best you can. And that's when things really started rolling.
And these visits to North America, that was after the rollout had occurred? So was the rollout the first time that you saw the aircraft?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I'm just curious what your impression was the first time that you saw the aircraft.
Well, if I did see it before, I saw it in the jigs and so forth being constructed, and plenty of pictures, so it wasn't, it wasn't like it was, wow, it just came on screen, first time ever,
Okay.
there it is in reality.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything like that.
Okay. But it certainly looked different than any other aircraft that was flying at the time.
Yes, and the funny little thing, the vice president, it's one of these things where you hope the mic isn't open, but it's still, and when it did come rolling out, he made an aside comment to somebody up there on the podium with me. He says, gee, that's a funny looking thing, isn't it? something to that effect. It may not be a direct quote, but it was.
Yeah. There was a lot of feeling too with the X-15 when it first rolled out and stuff. Nixon was there, and he was talking about, this is the aircraft that's going to take the first American into space, or first human into space, really. Of course, at the time, we never thought the Russians were going to beat us. Obviously, things changed with the Mercury program and Vostok and such. How did you feel at the time about the fact that this was, I'm not really sure how to put it, it was, this was like the vanguard of the American space program at the time, but then it got supplanted by the Mercury program. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I don't know if I worried very much about it. Of course, I realized that, we're going somewhere where we haven't been before. So I was tremendously impressed with that. And it's like I say, I was preparing myself as best I could to be able to meet that challenge. And I wasn't going to back away from it. As a matter of fact, I had in my fighter operations, my boss, was he Major Lieutenant Colonel? Anyway, I was on runway control. We used to have this little glass house out there alongside the runway, and you'd watch as airplanes came in and check them through the field glass and make sure the gear was down. And if it wasn't or something, you could either call them on the radio or shoot up a red flare. It was just, kind of a boring duty, but, we took turns doing it. And so he came out to the shack and he talked to me a little bit, but he said, you've been designated. And I knew all this already, but he's presenting it almost like it was something new. And he said, maybe, he says, you want to go home and maybe talk to your wife, or you want to think about it? And I said, no. I said, if I have to think about it, they've got the wrong man. And so he left, and that was that.
Okay. Yeah. You just sort of feel relieved in some ways that the spotlight left the X-15 and went down to the Cape instead, and let you guys go on with what you were supposed to do?
I didn't care. The one time I felt, how should I feel? How would you feel? Let me put it this way. Was it a little bit of resentment? But the National Geographic magazine, they were following the program closely. And they would have an observer on the B-52, they wanted to get some pictures and all, because they were going to do articles. And they approached Joe Walker and I, and they said, Joe, we'd like to have you, a byline article from you in one of our issues on advancing the speed, and Major White, a byline article on advancing the flight in altitude. And they said, and we would pay, each of you would receive $1,000 for that. So, Major back then, $1,000, kids in school. So, of course, for NASA, there was no problem in agreeing to that. But I then talked my full colonel, who was the public information officer, it was Colonel Brown, and they had to go through channels to see whether or not it was okay. Well, now Life magazine had already come up with this, what was it, $50,000 to the 7 Mercury guys, and fine, they're cashing in, big deal. But so it went through channels, come back, and some assistant secretary for whatever, came back and said, no, Major White can byline the article, but he cannot accept any money for it. So, I kind of shook my head at that, and I thought, I wondered, well, what goes on? Because, essentially we've got, except for, one man, we've got military officers. And what applies and what doesn't apply. Absolutely. So, it was, I felt a little bit just funny about that.
Yeah.
And of course, but back then for me, I could have used it.
Oh, yeah. So your half of the article for National Geographic never came out?
Oh, it did. No.
Oh, it did?
We went ahead and still did the byline, but but there was nothing in the middle.
Okay. Yeah. Now, when did your article come out in National Geographic? Do you have a copy of it still?
Well, wait, let's see.
Sure.
Artists, and they would sponsor. They let them. They could travel on airplanes to different places and do paintings of Air Force life. It could be mechanics working on there, all sorts of things. And so I got a call list that Maxine McCaffrey would be coming out from Los Angeles. She wanted to do some work, some X-15 stuff. Fine. So we come up, we met her, the guy who ran our, unit that we had there, with this, where we got suited up and so forth. And a very pretty woman. And she come in, well, we greeted him and chatted. And here's what I do, I take pictures. And then I take them back to my home, my studio, and I do the painting from all these photographs I take. So fine, and we're very accommodating. And so she said, I'm overwhelmed. I really appreciate how you've made me feel so welcome and all. And I said, well, why not? So she said, well, I applied for this program, you know, I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to use my talent and perhaps get some recognition. And so she went to an office in Los Angeles, and there was a lieutenant colonel there. And she said he wasn't very nice. He was you know, like, well, we don't need women in this program or something like this. So, you know, one of those kind of guys. And so, but then when she got, and this was her first job, so to speak, you know, on this Air Force program. So when she came up there and we were, you know, accommodating her, fine, take your picture, do this. She just felt overwhelmed and grateful. So one New Year's Eve, she came up to the house at Edwards when I was there, and it was her brother, and had a painting of me, but it was in uniform, down from the picture. And then this thing was hanging in the officers' club at Edwards. And then when I was transferred there, out of there, when I was commander of the flight district, when I was commander, it had been hanging in the club. Then my successor, I shouldn't say this in front of the camera. His wife decided, no, that goes back in some storeroom somewhere. So I had a little bit of delay there before I actually left the installation onto my exercise. So I had couple of very good friends there, obviously. And they told me, said, you know what happened with Penguin? Back, so it was smuggled out of the storeroom and put in my belongings. I said, well, I'll keep it. I'll give it to the Air Force Academy someday or something.
There you go. Yeah, well, you have this honor coming up with the Aviation Hall of Fame in Dayton.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Chris and I are leaving Monday, a week from today, and we're going up to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. The Air Command and Staff College, Air University is there. And they have a thing that's called the Gathering of Eagles. And there's a group of people, I have some old friends that'll be there too. And they have a group of people come in and interface with the faculty and the student body. And it's at the major level. And so that should be interesting for a week. And then their graduation, it's black tie affair. So we do that. Then I'll run up to Birmingham, see my daughters, and then Decatur is an old Air Force buddy there. Back, and then in July at the Hall of Fame. That should be interesting.
Yeah. Well, now you're from New York originally, right? How'd your daughters end up in Birmingham?
Well, you know, how do we end up anywhere? After World War II, what happened to America? It became a mobile society.
Yeah.
And then, of course, me being in the Air Force, you know, with the family. They travel all over the place. And
were you stationed around that area and they just
no,
stayed in that area?
No. Let's see, how did that happen? My youngest daughter's husband was stationed there with a ROTC unit. He was an officer, but as you know, one of the officers overlooking at a school there. And my older daughter, she got in the education system up there. Then when she got a master's from Boston College, it was to be in counseling. I studied psychology and all business. But she couldn't get a job right away in that area. So she went back into the education system. And now she said, Dad, I never thought I'd become a computer nerd. But she teaches how to use programs. She can repair computers, and she'll teach them how to, you know, do everything with it. And she is a, you know, technical specialist. So she got out of the teaching because she had been a teacher and got into this stuff. And she said the system was very good. But she tells me, she said, Dad, she says, here I am. I'm the only one with a master's degree. She said, Greg has got his own business with 3 partners. They have their own company. And my other one is, he's another computer whiz and does work. And she says, and I've got a master's, and my sister never went to college, and she's a an executive in a bank. She doesn't even work in the bank. She's in the executive offices, you know, as a vice president. And she says, here I am, the only one with a master's degree, and I'm probably making the lowest salary of all of them. She's a pistol. She's a pistol.
All right.
Funny, yeah, great. Yeah. But anyway, where were we?
Okay, well, go back to the beginnings of the X-15 program. Just talk to me about your first flight experience.
First flight experience, okay. The nice thing about the X-15 was that, you know, you're coming, you're doing a dead stick landing, of course, you know, all the fuel's gone. And you could take an F-104 and you could configure, you know, you reduce the power, you got partial flaps down, you know, however you configure the airplane, so it has almost exactly the same lift-drag ratio at 300 knots airspeed as the X-15. So here it is, an in-flight simulator.
Yeah.
And you could actually come in and practice your dead stick landings. And you could get it down to perfection. And I don't use this because I hope you wouldn't, but anyway, my first flight, I mean, I look forward to it greatly. And Joe made the first government flight. He got the first flight, and I would do the second one. So Joe came in, and he must not have taken it seriously, because, you know, where are you going to land? Because they put up some cameras and stuff, you know, they want to photograph it and get the touchdown. And you were landing on the dry lake, and so he must have gone 2 miles past the point where the touchdown. So then working with Bob Hoy and, you know, and Dick Day on the simulator one night, I said, Bob, where are you going to land? I said, where the camera is? You know, you have a little smoke thing going there? I said, that's where I'm going to land. I said, well, you know, give me plus or minus 1,000 feet. So Dick Day, the NASA engineer, he said, Bob, he said, I'll bet you, Marty. Because when we finished the simulator, we used to go down to North America before they moved it up to Edwards. And then we'd work there at night, and then we'd go out for dinner, and we'd have a martini before dinner. So Dick Day said, I'll bet you a martini you won't do it. I said, okay. And then I said, Dick, would you make it 2? And he said, yeah. So I did it. You see, because I practiced that thing and I had it nailed. And as a matter of fact, Scott Crossfield made his approaches at 240 knots speed. And he got into an oscillation the first time, but that was because there was a problem in the flight control system, see. But that I reckoned with the guys. I said, look, I said, you know, you're much better off from the controllability of the airplane. You're not going to get down too slow. And I said, I think, and it became standard when I put it out as the way to land the airplane. That became the standard way every pilot flew the approach. And after, so the first flight was no, you know, I was happy to get it going and look forward to it greatly. And without any fear or concern or anything, I knew that, hey, no problem, I know what I'm doing. I'll do it, and then, of course, you know, land it. But you always knew, and that's why we had this, and I'm sure people have told you this time, you did this, what was purely logic, to take an incremental approach. You know, you move ahead a little bit at a time. And during the program, it proved to be the right thing to do, because one time we had a little buckling of the wing. You know, they had a space there when they had these little, I forget why that thing was there, but a little space, and it created a hot spot and started buckling the wing. Well, can you imagine if we went another Mach number? Maybe it could have caused structural damage. I had, as you know, windshield cracked both times, twice, and suppose that windshield had gone out. You know, it's really problematic whether we could have saved the airplane or me. You know? So it was the only logical thing to do, and that proved to be, you know, the way to go.
How was being fired off the shackles that first time? Was that something you were prepared for? I talked to some of the later pilots, and they said that was something that it's like the earlier pilots purposely didn't tell them about that aspect of being fired off the shackles, and that was sort of.
You're not fired off. You're just dropped.
Well, dropped. But I mean, it felt like they were being, you know.
But I mean, why should they be so surprised? You know, they've watched
Yeah.
They watched airplanes all the time, from the X-1 dropping out of the bomb bay to
Oh,
the
yeah.
X-2. So they drop you.
Yeah.
And so they drop you, you start flying.
Yeah. Yeah, I just remember Milt Thompson, that was one of his big things. It's like, yeah, they didn't tell me about that or something. It really hit him, I guess. He just wasn't expecting it as much as,
Oh, well,
yeah.
I can't imagine that, because there was a countdown.
Yeah.
So, it's 3, 2, 1, and you're ready. So as soon as you drop off, you start flying.
Yeah.
So it's instinctive.
Okay.
But one other point about that, they were, when we still had the 2 small engines, because you drop off and then you'd fire them up with the 8 toggle switches, because there's so many different chambers. But when we got the big engine, the XLR 99, then you were monitoring because your first stage igniter, so you had a little fire going, then the second stage, and you were monitoring those pressures very closely. And they had to be right, and you only had about another 5 seconds. Now, they had, our flight engineer on board was throwing the switch to drop you. But, let's see, who made the first one? Well, Scotty actually made the first one, because he had to demonstrate the engine work. But when that came up, I was gonna fly, I said, okay, the pilot could drop himself. So I said, no, flight engineer, keep your hand away from that switch. I am going to make that decision, because I've only got 5 seconds to determine whether or not my chamber pressures are right. Because if they're not, and he drops you, and Joe Walker said, maybe you wouldn't want to write this either. You don't know, I'll leave it the way it is. Until the day came when Joe was screaming, and that last 5 seconds, don't drop, don't drop, don't drop. And of course, he agreed that, that's what you should do is, the pilot has to make that decision. It's too critical.
Yeah.
So that became standard procedure. Then, we had the center stick. And then when we went to the side stick, I said, well, you gotta, what do you think, one of the engineers said, well, what do you think about the side stick, So I said, well, okay. I said, this coming flight, I will fly it from drop to landing. So that was the first time it was gonna be all side stick from drop to landing. I did that one.
Was it easier to control than the center stick?
That was fine.
Same.
Piece of cake.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So,
A lot of your flights on the program, what's the one flight that stood out the most? Was it your altitude flight, or was it some other aspect?
I suppose that I would have to say, well, we wanted to get to Mach 6. And I remember there, when I leveled off at about 107,000 feet, and then made just a little downward pressure so that we could slightly downhill. I didn't want to be climbing on it. And I remember as we're going along, and I'm watching that meter going over, it had thousands of feet per second. And roughly 6,000 feet per second was where you'd get it. And I remember just saying, go, 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 and we just did crack it. Because we knew that the fuel, the altitude, bringing all the proper things together, we could or should get just about Mach 6. And then the engineers will play with the data and whatever the temperatures and pressures are and so forth, and reduce the data and have it come up with a number. But in retrospect, I have to say that the high altitude flight, now I had gone to 217,000 somewhere, and that was impressive enough. But when I got up there on this one, it really was, and here's the way I've often, and I've said this a number of times in debriefings or when people ask me, I'm up roughly over the California-Nevada border in the area of Las Vegas, generally, because we were just beyond Las Vegas, we launched. And up top there, and here's the way I describe it. I said, I looked as though I could spit into the Gulf of Baja and toss a dime into San Francisco Bay. And then that, indeed, and there was no question that, Columbus is right, the earth is round. And so it was dramatically impressive, but of course it's short term, but you take it all in, and then pretty soon, okay, now I have to start dialing in my angle of attack to prepare for the re-entry. And the re-entry was very dynamic. I think, I never forget, because it wasn't long after, I only think I did one flight after that? And I was at the end of the program.
Yeah.
Okay, see you later. Bye. She's gonna run off somewhere. Let me slide this door open a little bit because it gets a little bit warm in here. This one little air conditioner duct that doesn't do much good in this room. But anyway, and there was, so the Mini Honey adaptive control system, I think wasn't in perfect tune because I was getting this little hunt back and forth in the nose, you know, about a cycle a second, or more than a cycle a second. So it really was hunting hard, but it didn't bother me much because that told me the system is working. You know, it's maintaining me directionally in good shape. Then of course I found out well afterwards that my post-flight remarks made quite a flurry with the engineers because we didn't have a real post-flight debriefing because we were scheduled to go to Washington to get that Collier trophy. So no post-flight, but an engineer came out to the van where we are in pressure suit and so forth, and so he did a little quick debriefing. Like for instance, he says, Bob, when you turn, because I've overshot, I passed over the field at about 3.5 Mach number, 80,000 feet, you know. So I made the largest 360 in history getting back, which I did. And, like he said, Bob, when you started to turn, we got on the road trip. But anyway, okay, so I said, yeah, I did. He said, why? I said, well, I wanted to make sure that the nose was canting down slightly because I had to be losing altitude as I lose speed to maintain dynamic pressure. No dynamic pressure, and you're not going to get G-forces to turn. Yeah. And and I had to turn because there's no way I had to get back. And on the ground, they were all, I'm sure they sweated out that whole thing as to whether. But I did a right turn. Even Joe Walker says, Bobby suggests a right turn. Well, I knew instinctively that's what I was going to do because here is Rogers Dry Lake, and then over here is Big Rosamond Lake. So I'm turning in the direction where I have the option. I'm going to be able to put this sucker down. Right. So, but I did get it right back to where they want. And so I had to say that was the most dramatically impressive. For the re-entry, the forces that have thrown you forward down, and of course as I was playing the debriefing, I was splotched here with the, they call it petechiae, the small blood vessels, a lot of bursting. And it's just a little achy feeling, and in a week or so it goes away. So, no problem.
Well, you certainly, we got Chuck Yeager broke Mach 1, Scotty broke Mach 2, Mel Apt, of course, we lost when he broke Mach 3.
Yeah, and I did. I know, and I never thought about it until later on, and that just shows you how this program is working. Nobody was keeping, that close an eye on it. Yeah. And I didn't realize afterwards that, I was first 4, 5, and 6. Yeah. Now I'm sure if some NASA guy says, hey, wait a minute, Joe, we ought to get Joe to break one of these, And afterwards I said, that's interesting. It just happened to work out. Unless they did it to let me do it intentionally, because if they're going to lose a guy, it better be him instead of Joe.
As long as you got there first, then Joe would do it right after you. At that point, he was leapfrogging you, And you were also the first person to get astronaut rating in a winged vehicle, fifth astronaut. So you got some pretty impressive records there. There's nobody else that has records quite like that. Yeah.
But it took a long time. I don't know sour grapes or anything, but I really gave up on. For a while, I had some thoughts that maybe I'll make the Hall of Fame, but then I just gave up. I said, well, I guess for whatever reason, they figure I don't qualify. But it worked. It would have been nice if I were a little younger when it happened. But you can enjoy it a little bit more.
Yeah, that's true.
July, the 6th of July, I'll be 82.
82, all right, yeah. Yeah, I just turned 50 myself, so.
Look at 50 again.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, it's a great honor, yeah, as you say, it's bad when a lot of these things get overlooked, it's,
But another thing, though, too, you know, a lot of highlight made of that, and of course, obviously, you know, it has to stand out because it's unique in a way. But it's like when we were doing these things, there was a lot of press coverage. The guys were there; they were on scene. There were people there. And after one flight, I'm sitting there in this little, you know, desk with a NASA guy with me, and a reporter said, "Well, Major White," he said, "I suppose you'd have to consider the most outstanding or the most unusual flying experience you could ever have." And I thought for about 3 seconds, and I said, "Well, it certainly is that, but it doesn't stand alone." And he said, "Well, what else could rival it?" I said, "Flying as a fighter pilot in combat." And he just looked. He didn't understand it. You know? And if you want to know what it's like to have the adrenaline rush, getting shot at is extraordinarily exhilarating, to say the least. And then too, of course, when you're young, I was disappointed that I didn't get there when the great air battles were still going on, but the Luftwaffe was essentially defeated. So we were driven to the deck a lot. And it was the third time I was hit when I went down. But, you know, when you're young, you can react instinctively. And one fellow asked me one time, he said, you never practice with a parachute, you bailed out or anything? It was the first time. I said, "Right. Well, how'd you know what to do?" I read a book, a little article, you know, it shows you in the book, tells you what to do. You know, get up on the seat, crunch low, and then dive for the right wing, because, you know, washes this. Dive for the wing, just like you're diving into a pool. You won't hit the wing, you'll go over, and you'll go under the tail, so you won't hit the tail, you know, pull the ripcord. But it wasn't until later that I thought, you know, beside the rush, there is a bit of shock associated with this. You suffer, although I didn't realize I was in any shock, but I guess there was something to it. You know, I got hit, direct hit in the engine. So the oil covers the windshield, right? So I had to get rid of the canopy, open up the canopy so I could see, because the black oil, and of course gauges are all going. And so I knew I was done. That was it. I knew that this was. So I'm struggling for altitude because I just finished firing at a ME-109 sitting there on the ground and come off, and so I'm struggling for altitude. I'm trying to get altitude, and I said, "See you guys in 2 weeks." You know? Errol Flynn did it. I couldn't. So I went ahead and and then when I realized, you know, that there probably isn't much time left, and I felt I was okay, out I went, and. So, I mean, if that shell, you know, if it was a fraction of a second later, it could have hit me. But no, thank God. So I went out, pulled that ripcord, I got the opening shock of the parachute, and I was immediately going through trees.
Wow.
Now, again, you know, and I'm just reacting to the moment. I'm not thinking about that. I mean, I was going face down, and I could see there was one clearing and a bunch of, you know, the logs were all piled up. You know, I remember seeing that, and then, you know, the chute, and right through the trees. And so, you know, okay, hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, you know, could unhook, you know, climb down that tree, then it's quiet, listen, move, you want to get away from where you are. There's no farmers coming at me with pitchforks. Take out my .45, get rid of bullets in the bushes, field strip the weapon, throw it in the bushes, good, be no use for it. And so you know, you're going through all these things, you're mentally preparing to move, okay, got to move far away as I can. Then finally come to a field where I'm at the end of a forest line, so I come out and I slid down in a gully, little gully, and I said, okay, let's get our bearings here. And I, you know, open up my little escape kit, get a map. Now I'm going to come up with a plan. I've already committed myself that, look, the odds are entirely against you. Germany stamped this, papers, the way the Germans are. And I could discover for many years later, spending a lot of time there, but, so I reconciled to myself, no regrets, and from that day to this, I don't deal in regrets, and just accept it. But it wasn't until later when when you had time to think about it and go back and rehash it, you think, by God. And then you figure, when you get into the camp now, that was the one good thing too about that. Instead of isolation, solitary confinement, because there was such a lot of us, that you're in together and you reinforce one another, And we knew that eventually we'd be done. And then you figured, well, boy, I got a story. And then I heard a story, I figured, hey, that's nothing. Like a guy saying, well, I came down in the nose when the airplane, the B-17 blew up, and I came down in the nose and crashed in the forest, no parachute ride. So I said, hey, and so it's, so he didn't understand that. But, and then of course, I'm in Vietnam. And I told you that when I stopped at the bottom and looked, because I knew what was about the Hanoi Hilton. And I'm extraordinarily grateful for that, because I'm not very good with pain. And, but anyhow, and even there, and a lot of my old squadron mates in Germany, and the thing that really made me feel good, that's when I got to Vietnam, I said, oh, Colonel White, we didn't know when you'd get here, but we knew you'd come. And I volunteered to go. Crazy me. So, but anyway, it was very good. And then I got rewarded with decorations that I thought I'd never get, but that's immaterial.
It's not what you think about when you're going through it all, that's for sure.
And of course, you realize a lot of those things are good for morale purposes. And you do it for good reason too, because things you do.
Yeah. What kind of differences were there? Obviously, probably a little different kick in the pants with the LR-11 versus the LR-99.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, LR-11s were, that was nothing more than a pretty good fighter that's light the burner and go. But you look the 99 up there full throttle and zap, you're pinned to the back of the seat. And I think it was, what's his name? He wrote the book that was published under the auspices of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. He died many years ago. To the Edge of Space.
Tell me, Jules Bergman's?
No. This was one of the X-15 guys.
Oh, that was Mel Thompson's book.
Mel Thompson.
Yeah, that was Thompson's.
Well, he said it perfectly. He said, because the pressure continues to build the faster you go, and till finally you're finding it difficult to breathe, against all this pressure on your chest. And he made the comment. He says, it's the only airplane I ever flew. I was glad when the engine quit. That's exactly, because all of a sudden, it's all relieved and you can breathe again.
Yeah. Well, that's a question. When you first drop off the B-52, maybe go a little bit through the launch sequence as far as that. You were straight up to the 100%, or did you have, take a few seconds to do that? What was the procedure?
Sooner you come off, as I say, you start flying because you get a little roll off. You've seen it. That's a natural thing because of the airflow. And you come off that thing, so you just write the thing and you just shove it right up.
Okay. So
that's it, just what, boom.
Just push it right up there as
right
fast as possible. Yeah. And you got up to what, about 5 Gs, something like that, usually?
Yeah, I forget. It was pretty good. I'll tell you what. Because you're ready for it to quit.
Yeah.
They're ready for it to quit.
Now you went through the program where you went through the centrifuge training up at John.
Back back then, when we went to Jonesville, the big cheeses were Crossfield, Kinchlow, Joe Walker, and I got a chance to do it once, and I did not put the headrest down. So when the when that thing started, and I'm in there, and they got a funny picture, and they try to push my head up. And of course, since I'm not there trying to control it, and it comes to a stop. And that was it. So I never really had any centrifuge time. And it was a laborious type thing because it was all vacuum tube technology. There's a lot of downtime. You know, you spend a lot of time sitting around, and even the guys that got several rides, you know, you spend a whole day for just relatively few runs.
Now you had a few times when you had little things go wrong on the flight and stuff. I know one time you had an engine that failed to start and you restarted it, or did it shut down on you when you restarted it? How did that work?
Well, yeah, if it shut down, you could recycle and start.
Okay. And how long did it take to go through that procedure? Was it like 10 seconds or something?
No, not that long.
Oh, not that long. Okay.
I'm trying to think. I don't think I ever had one shut down on me.
Well, I think, yeah, that was my question, was I think that I read one time that you had a restart, so I was just wondering if it just failed to start immediately, or?
No. Maybe you're talking about when the Minneapolis Adaptive Flight Control System dropped offline, and I reset it.
Okay.
That was it. That's before launch.
Okay.
And they came, they said, one of the guys wrote, he says, well, Bob was rather nonchalant there because that really would have been a cancellation of the flight. And I didn't even think about it because this was the third time we went on the flight. We had, and it was always, I went up 32 times, but only launched 16. So in the early days of the program, there was still a maturing process as far as the systems were concerned. So this was the flight that was going to go. You go up to supposedly 278 or 280,000 feet. And we had canceled twice. So this was the third attempt. And I guess it was so near launch that I instinctively reacted by just resetting the flight controls. It reset properly, and then I said, just continue the countdown, and we continued the countdown. It wasn't very long afterwards that drop off and go. And of course, if we had failed the third time to launch, we would have landed, then they would have shut down the whole operation because we had to go back to Washington. Then we had to go back and reset. And as a matter of fact, there was an Air Force PR guy, I think it was a major, when he met us, we came into the airport or somewhere, but he said, God, he says, Major White, if we had dreamed this up, if we had scripted it, we couldn't have done it better. And he's going on, he's like a crazy man. He said, here it is, you're coming to the White House. The newspapers got headlines. You broke this record. The president's going to see you. He got on the phone and said, "You guys come on back," just because of that. They said the timing couldn't have been better, and he was right. Just by accident. Just by accident.
Worked out perfectly.
So he said, we couldn't have written the script any better.
Hollywood would never.
That's right. That's right. Unbelievable.
Now you got very lucky. You were one of the few pilots who never had an emergency that required you to go into a different lake bed. Did you ever participate in any recovery operations from other emergency landings? Did you ever have to go up to any of the other lake beds?
No. But that didn't bother me one bit in case it had to happen. Because what I would do, I would spend a couple of weeks intensely preparing for a flight. With the engineers on the simulator. I would take an F-104. I would fly up, say, to Mud Lake, let's say where we're going to launch. And right there then, I'm up there. And then arbitrarily I would just bring the throttle back up and configure it like I lost the engine quit. And then I'd come down, go through the procedure, and make a pass as though I'm landing. I'm dead stick. And then I'd climb back upstairs, and I'd go down to the next emergency light. And again, just, maybe I'm 25,000 feet, I just arbitrary, pull it back, no pre-planned thing, and then just start maneuvering, then picking up my cues, and go around and slide across there, just like I was gonna make a landing. Good, oh boy, push the throttle back up, and then go to the next one. And that's what I do, so I worked that. And so I had no compunction whatsoever about if the airplane caught on fire, things like that. These are dire emergencies, you have to get out or something. But if it was just a matter of making an emergency landing, because it all plotted out, depending on where you were when the engine quit, and it was all schemed, the guys would know, Bob, you're gonna turn back. You can get back to Mud Lake, or continue straight ahead to whatever, So then you go ahead, jettison the rest of your fuel, and then go ahead and just do it. So I had no problem with that.
Were other pilots following that same example? Were they going up and doing these tests on different lake beds? Or was that just something you did yourself?
I don't know how much they were doing it as much as I was, but I sure as I was doing it.
Okay.
Because I said, right there, in these hands, and I mean, not to be bragging or anything, but I was pretty good.
Yeah.
I was pretty good at what I did.
Oh, yeah.
But, other breaks.
Yeah.
And, you can make mistakes. What's that thing we're running now? I gotta tell a story about Neil Armstrong.
Are you talking about the time when he went into the lake bed? And,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But see, what happened there was this. Paul Bickle, who ran the place, he asked me, he said, Bob, will you do me a favor and go up to whatever that lake was, I forget the name of it. And we had never used it, but now we're, extending the range and so forth. So he said, would you go up and, take a look at it? Are there any inhibitions for approaches, like are there hills somewhere? How is it for using it as a launch leg, which means it could be a recovery. So I went up, took a look, I made some passes, came down, I came back, told him, I said, it looks fine. I said, but don't have anybody go up there and practice any landings until they paint the black stripes. Because it was just trying to judge your depth perception over the sea, where it's, calm sea. Very difficult. In the same way on that, boy, that blinding sun on that lake, and I went up the next day to him, and I gave him the devil. I said, Paul, am I a member of this team or not? And he said, he apologized, Bob, I'm sorry. I said, well, come on, I told you. And now, it's your embarrassment, not mine.
Yeah,
it was unfortunate, you hate to see it happen, but it made me unhappy to think that he's questioning my judgment.
Yeah.
And here I am, one of the prime guys in the program, and he shouldn't be quite too late to question my judgment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was.
Or unless he said, yeah, I'll have you run, and then would you mind, I'm gonna ask Joe to go up and make a couple passes too. I'd say, for sure, be my guest.
Yeah. I take it they got the lines painted on there pretty quick after that.
Amen.
Yeah, that was such a mess, yeah. Yeah, Paul had some interesting stories to talk about Neil too. He and Neil were very good friends. And,
oh yeah, Neil is he was a nice guy. Got pictures with him. We were, look at us, just chatting there. I've got a bunch of pictures with him.
Yeah.
And then, in California, we had that lunch afterwards, sitting there, shooting the breeze with him.
Yeah, he gets sort of a bad rap, people just, he's just like a hermit or something, it's like that. He's just, he's just always been a very shy person. He's very, when he has friends, he's really good friends. He's just, he's not out there trying to make a lot of new friends.
Well, and I guarantee you, although I'm sitting here shooting my guns off like mad, I'm not this way except when I get with people that, in the context of the business. Because if I'm talking to other people that don't know anything about it, how do you explain these things? They wouldn't understand what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to get into some detail.
Yeah. Well, you certainly had a great run on the X-15 program.
And then, of course, the time came, and I knew.
Yeah.
And I knew too, because when I was a major, I was, two different companies offered me jobs, aviation companies. And I denied both of them. I said no, because I was determined that, you know, I'm a professional officer, and that's the way I'm gonna go. I'm gonna wear the uniform. And even Bob Rushford asked me one time, when he says, you know, Bob, he said, what are you thinking about the future? You know, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to get back into tactical aviation. And so he said, well, what's your goal? I said, well, I would consider that I'd have an enormously successful military career if I were able to retire as a major general. And oh boy, you do. And I said, well, I can, well, what's wrong? I can say that, but it probably will never happen, but why not? But I was dedicated to staying. And even when after I did that high flight, I said, okay, you know, the zenith of my participation in this program, now I'm up to 9 years in the sun. This is an extraordinarily long period of time. In fact, this Air Command and Staff School I'm going to, I took that by correspondence because I knew I didn't have the time, and I wanted it on my record so I could say, hey, I'm too big, don't send me there. And, you know, War College in Washington later on, great, but, so I was dedicated to do that, and, you know, some things broke my way. And, like I used to tell the guys in my squadron, I said, you know, hey guys, look, I got this herd out here. There you are. You know, I got 32 guys here. And I said, how does the Air Force judge, you know, who you guys, how you're going to move along? I said, there's nothing magic about it. They just wait for heads to pop up here and there. They, oh, there's a guy, you know. So I said, the best way you can do this, I said, look, you know, maybe you get some additional duties. I'm writing your report. And, hey, you're all good flyers. Well, you say, well, he's great for flying. You know, he can handle it fire well. He shoots guns good and all. But I said, you know, maybe do other things. And then I had guys to volunteer for all sorts of different things. You know, fixing up our operations place, new boards that, you know, that have all our stuff on there that shows where we stand and what we need to do to keep qualifying and so forth. You know, you got to inspire them. And they say that, you know, you get a break. And of course, you know, you get some notoriety. And let's face it, it had to help. Because when I finished there, I was already opting out. You know, my commanding general, I was new. I said, well, you know, I guess it's time for me to move on. And this is just an aside now. It has nothing to do with the program. It's just me. But and General Schriever, who was my big boss, the systems command guy, he was the missile man. And and I flew him in a 104 once from Edwards to, he wanted to get some time in some of the airplane because he'd always been involved in the missile business. So he wanted me to fly him. He had a speaker dining in in Albuquerque. So I flew him there, got him out to Mach 1.6. Had him do a roll. He said, well, you do it, I'll follow you through. I said, no, I don't have time, we're wasting fuel. I said, just do what I tell you to do. He's a 4-star general. And, you know, he whipped it around, come in, and he was happy. But, okay, he had plans for me to go, I guess, over to the Cape and work my way into the system and work up to be the launch director on Titan II missile. So I told my 1-star boss and everything, I said, well, I want to go back to tactical aviation. So he said, well, let me speak to him. He came back and he says, he won't listen to me. I said, well, do you mind if I talk to him? I said, you know, I don't. I said, yeah, I know you flew him in the 104. I go, talk, he won't listen to me. So I called his office, and then when he was down in Los Angeles, they used to have what they call the ballistic missile division there. So when he was there, got a call from a major something, you know, the general will see if you're there at noon around, certainly. So I whipped down there. He came into this big conference room. It was empty. threw his feet up on the table, and he said, Bob, sit down, what is it? So I made my pitch. And I told him, I said, you know, I've been out of tactical aviation all this time, and a lot of changes happened. I said, I don't know anything about nuclear weapons, you know, how we secure, save them, their use, targeting, anything like that. I said, I need to get back in the business, so I update myself on that. And I said, and I hope that maybe someday I'd have an opportunity to be, you know, go out there and command a squadron. And so he listened, and finally said, oh, well, okay. He said, what kind of equipment would you like to fly? I said, doesn't matter. I said, it can even be the old F-84F, if there's any squadrons left in the Air Force. I said, as long as I get a chance maybe someday to be a squadron commander, you know, and get back in the business. And so, where do you want to go? Any place in the world, doesn't matter. You know, I'm not going to be a damn fool and say, well, I want to go here, I want to fly that. Yeah, give me the ice cream cone.
Yeah.
So he finally agreed. And he had a son-in-law that spent time at Bitburg, Germany, which was a premier fighter outfit then. And so that's where I went. And I was a major, and I called Nellis, and I wanted to get a quick run-through update on 105, but checked out again, do a few runs and a couple of weapons delivery, hook up with a tanker a couple of times. To get so I hit the place running when I got there. And while I was at Las Vegas for, I think I spent 2 weeks, they gave me a special deal, allowed me to get through a little quickie course. Because they were doing a lot of training. That was big business training there, so it was easy to fit me in. And not that I was some inexperienced pilot anyway, so. And while I was there, the promotion list of Lieutenant Colonel came out, and I was on it. So I arrived over there in Germany. I was going over there to be a squadron operations officer. But, so they put me in the 22nd, I became the ops officer there, and an old test pilot's old classmate was the squadron commander, and he was going to leave in 3 to 4 months, you know. So we were good friends. We were in the same class at the test pilot school, and I kept saying, Bob, come on, when are you going to get out of here? He said, don't worry, it's your squadron, you'll take it over. So it went on from there.
Okay. Did you follow the X-15 program after you left?
Yeah, I did, and when we, when they lost the one X-15, what's his name was killed? Mike Adams, I didn't know him, he was not in the program, right?
Yeah.
And so Bob Rushworth wrote me a long letter to explain it all. And then, of course, I got more correspondence later when Joe Walker was killed. That was a shocker, a real shocker. So yeah, you tried to keep up with it as best you could. But then, and I often felt that sometimes we went too far with these things. We started using it as a test bed. And to me, when I was participating in the program, your eye was always on the ball. It was very intense. And now you're starting to take this as a routine thing. And boy, that's not routine stuff. Yeah. And then, when we lost that airplane, we shouldn't have. The electric motor on that thing wasn't even qualified for low pressure operation. When you get up there, extremely low pressures. And a lot of them say dual presentation. You can flip a switch and something will show you something is happening, and then flip it another way, and that same needle will show you something else is happening. And I thought, give me a break. In a fast-moving situation. Now, it's all right if you're sitting there in a 747 and you're cruising along, and wait a minute, and you get this thing figured out. It's not that you're not in a stable condition. So, and that's just personal stuff. You don't need to do that, but you got to be careful. And I think, and I can't make a judgment. This is just me talking. I just wonder in our space program. Shuttles too, sometimes you can get cavalier about it. we went to Orlando. We were in Orlando yesterday, well, we left yesterday. Saturday night, granddaughter graduated from high school. Full scholarship to the University of Florida. And her brother, my grandson, is just finished his sophomore year, full scholarship there too. So they're great kids. But anyway, what's his name? My son's wife, his father, her father, was there, and Ron, and he worked for Lockheed at the Cape in that business. And I said, you know, I hear some things going on. I says, it's just, and I don't know anything about it. And he said, Bob, he says, and he's retired from the business, but he says, I've been so mad at things I hear going on. He said, now, he says, they're starting to roll out. And they said, well, there's still some things we might want to check on, some leaks or this or that. And he said, and now, he said, why? Oh, they say, oh, we're meeting our rollout day. You know, we're going to roll it out to the launch pad. He said, that's important? If you're still playing around with worrying about something in that building where you got all the stuff where you can go up and service it. He says, we get it out to the launch pad, and you got to build up all this stuff to get to the places you're worrying about and seeing if there's something needs to be fixed. And he's, you know, he's so mad because apparently he was heavily involved in working back in earlier days. And he said, I don't like, sometimes I hear these announcements, you know, the schedule, we made the schedule there.
Yeah, we filled in the blank, and that's all that matters, yeah.
Well, as I say, what do I know, you know, but it's just like, you know, I read the Da Vinci Code 2 years ago, and I know it's fiction, and they're making all this hullabaloo. I said, what's going on? It's fiction.
It's a story.
Yeah, that's right. It's a good story. It's a good story, a great detective story.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, all authors do that. Well, you know, so-and-so, when he was with the CIA working on this thing, and now the author builds a real great spy story.
Yeah.
So the CIA, the FBI, but it's fiction.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Jack Ryan is not really the president of the United States or whatever, you know. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. So, how do you feel about the new direction? Now we're supposedly getting away from the shuttle and going back to the moon and stuff. What do you feel about the direction of our program?
Well, I've always said, and this is kind of a simplistic view of it, but when I look at the space program, I say, well, if they can define for me whatever it is that they're trying to do, you know, if they can show me what benefit it has for us on this planet, you know, how does it enrich or make our lives better, or make this planet a better place to live on and survive, or what have you, then I'm interested. But if it, you know, and then when I think of, you know, oh, we're getting out there, why, we've never been that far out. And some guy's going to write a paper on this, and he's going to do a thesis, and he's going to have it published. We're not in the business of having these professors publish their stuff so they can have tenure and all that nonsense. And then they ought to be explaining why they are so interested in finding out whether there's water on Mars. Now, there's a hell of a good reason for wanting to know whether there's water on Mars. Because when we send somebody there, you know, water is going to be necessary for the people to survive while they're there. Without water, you're dead. Yep. And I mean, they can't carry enough fuel cells, that, you know, expended fuel cells, and make enough water for them to travel. So, you know, tell me about it.
Yeah. NASA's been horrible about getting the information out there. I talked to Dan Golden once, not long after he first became administrator many years ago, and I asked him specifically about that and said, you know, why isn't NASA getting the word out to the public? Why are we doing what we're doing and all this kind of stuff?
Amen.
He says, oh, we don't need PR. Our program speaks for itself.
Bull.
Nothing speaks for itself.
Well, you see, here's the thing that's important, because now here's me, and so, you know, I have a range of people, you know, like we have our golf and social club. And we have 36 guys and their wives, you know, and once a month we'll have a little match with the gals, and then in the evening, you know, in the clubhouse, a meal, whether it's, we go to a restaurant in the summer because it's, the population is gone, or we do it in the clubhouse and have it catered, whatever, and then the guys, we play golf together. But lots of these guys come to me and ask me these questions. They say, well, he knows, or well, at least he can have an opinion that's better because I don't know anything. And so I have to caveat everything I say to them with, you know, my lack of knowledge, because say NASA has not been telling me what I want as answers. Yeah. And that's it. So there are a number of us around who could speak on their behalf, or at least partially explain in a simplistic way to people who know very little about it, but they want some, you know, why this or why that. You can tell them. Yeah. Forget it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's too bad. I mean, well, it's like the standard thing is like the moon program and stuff. How could you take the biggest exploration in the history of mankind and bore people with it? People were looking at, oh wow, they went to the moon again. Like the guys, they could never explain what they were doing, and then they wonder why the program ended. You know, you've got to get the people behind it and stuff, and they're not going to get behind it if they don't understand what the purpose is. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I really get a kick out of, what's his name, he went up there, you know, hit the golf ball. I'm a golfer, so I got a kick out of it. Say, I know why he did that, because, you know, with that smaller gravity on there, but he's going to say, I wish I could hit him that far on Earth.
Yeah.
But, you know, hey, that's not the way to publicize a program.
No.
If there was something, if there were adjuncts to that particular trip, that's one thing that would, you know, give it a lot of credibility. And just as a gag, you know, he took his, hit a golf ball. But no, I don't know. Yeah. But see, that NASA is a different kind of NASA than the one I operated with.
Oh yeah.
And we're different. We're, you know, flight research. It's different.
Yeah, I've gotten that from so many people, especially, you know, the X-15 is really considered, you know, the zenith of, you know, aviation testing and everything else, just because it was operating under different rules back then.
Oh yeah.
You know, if something needed to be done, it was done. You didn't go through the bureaucrocy, the micromanagement.
Oh no, we didn't have to do that, right?
Yeah.
But it was, you know, I really enjoyed that program. And, well, as a matter of fact, before a flight, say I was going to fly on Friday. Well, as a matter of fact, a little anecdote. My very first X-15 flight, you asked me about that. It turned out, and it was a little delay because the old XB-70 made an emergency landing on the runway, and so, you know, guys were climbing down the rope, you know, or something like that. No big deal, but it delayed our flight. And then one of the NASA guys said, you know, Bob, he says, or maybe it was a day or so before, probably it. They said, you have any feelings about that? You know, the flight schedule for Friday, the 13th. And I said, no problem. Don't worry about that. So, but the other point I was going to make, what was it? Oh, yeah. For instance, yes, I was going to fly on Friday. Why? I'm back off 3 days from Friday, and I wouldn't touch a drop of alcohol at least 3 days in advance of the day I was going to fly. So, you know, I took things seriously. I had to, because, you know, this is new frontier stuff.
Yeah. Are you disappointed that we're not doing programs like the X-15 today?
Well, it'll be interesting. In fact, I did a thesis when I was in hell's our school back there? It's part of the National Defense University, the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. This is the War College and the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, part of it. And back there in Washington. And I entered a cooperative program with George Washington University where we could go for our master's in business administration. So that the the military school, and for instance, economics classes, a George Washington professor would teach us. We'd be the guys who opted for the master's program, you know, and other instructors would take care of the other guys. So economics, take your exams and so forth. And then the thesis, if George Washington approved my thesis, the ICAF would accept it, whatever they. And it was almost mutual understanding. And so I wrote a thesis on the needs for an advanced manned research aircraft. And so I went through, you know, using the X-15 as the background for it and advancing. But in it, really, I had and of course, it's just kind of an academic exercise because there are lots of stuff written Rand, you know, and you could research on, but everything was classified, and so my thesis was classified, see? And, but nevertheless, went through this exercise and did the thesis, and, but pointing out that there has to be a separate, independent research programs. Like if you postulate, like I was doing that with scramjet technology, maybe we could get to Mach numbers anywhere, you know, we're talking about the 9 to 13 or 14 Mach range. And I said, you know, somewhere where we ought to be getting into that range. And, but, you know, you have to ask, would there have to be structures, you know, structure technology, metallurgic technology developments. So there had to be a number of development programs going on, coincidentally, moving along. And then, if, you know, the technology was developed, then you could come together and you could have a new research vehicle. Why not, see? But, this, you know, the scramjet, I think that has moved at a snail's pace. It might have been able to move much faster. But it never caught on. And here I am, and you know, 1960 something, talking about that in a thesis. And there had been plenty of papers, you know, written. A lot of these think tanks and so forth, in technical outfits that talked about the possibilities of development, but it had to be a technological, almost revolution. But then look what the hell's happened in the electronic world. God, I went through and it was vacuum tube technology, and I mean, and coils, you know, resistors and, you know, capacitors, and come on. It's a new world. Like I told you, you know, we had a professor told us one time, someday electrical engineers will be able to do almost anything. And he was prophetic. I mean, kids today with their phones and TV screens and music and.
Well, I do a lot of work with, as I say, NASA doesn't do their own publicity, so I know that a lot of my job is we go out to schools and stuff like that, getting kids excited about space and things. And one of the things that I found that's really cool is the kids really love. You remember the toy, the Furby?
Yeah.
I just heard somebody made it as an offhand comment one time. The Furby happens to have a little computer in there that is basically about the same size as the computer that landed us on the moon with the lunar module. And so it's like we've actually got modeled a lunar module and a Furby. It's like it's the same thing. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I love Gene Cernan out there. He's talking all the time, and as he says, you know, hey, I lived on the moon in 1972. Don't ever tell me that anything in your life is impossible.
Sure.
And I just love that kind of talk, and that's the kind of stuff that, you know, NASA needs to be saying and stuff that, you know, we can do the impossible.
Absolutely.
And we're just too reticent, we're too moorbound on this stuff nowadays. You know?
Yeah, it's disappointing in a lot of ways, but I don't know. People, you know, it's hard to get people excited about something that, you know, really, you're talking about developing a technology, and it's such a complex subject. You know, most people wouldn't understand what you're even driving at, and so it doesn't, you know, excite anybody's imagination. You can excite their imagination. You know, you talk about, oh, if you're on Mars, this or that, the other thing, but there's a hell of a lot between Earth and Mars before you're ever going to get there.
Oh yeah.
A heck of a lot has to happen. So.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the other things we try to point out too. Is like, well, like you have a great example in here, the artwork and stuff. Because again, we talk with kids all the time. And it's like, well, I don't need to listen to you because I'm not going to become an astronaut. And it's like, well, yeah, but we need other people, including things like the arts and stuff. It's the arts that are so important. Right. I mean, without Jules Verne, we wouldn't have Tchaikovsky and you know, von Braun and the rest of these guys and stuff. You gotta have the imagination. Somebody's gotta think of it first. They gotta have the dream about it first, and that's what happens. And then, you guys come along and make it happen, so, yeah.
Yeah, I've often thought, when I think back to it, that, I was real fortunate to be at a place in time where I could do that and survive.
Yeah.
Makes me think of Kinchlow and, other guys,
Yeah.
Walker.
Yeah. I gotta tell you too, I know do you talk with a lot of the guys still? You keep in contact with the other pilots or the engineers like Bob Hovey, people like that?
Well, on occasion, yeah.
Okay.
Exchange some emails,
Okay.
I think. Yeah, when the, what is the spaceship,
Spaceship One.
Yeah, they got that thing. So I wrote to Bob Hoy and I said, hey, Bob, I said, I can't get anything, reading the ordinary newspapers, but I need to understand the aerodynamics of this thing. And I also, I'm really interested in what the flight control system is like. So he said, he wrote back and he says, oh yeah, he says, don't believe anything you read in the newspapers because they don't know anything. And he says, I'm more than pleased to tell someone who'll understand what I'm talking about. So he gave me a real good rundown on it. And I'll tell you what, that guy's a genius at doing that stuff. Because the simplicity of it. And the only thing that really was unfortunate, it's a good thing he had well-experienced pilots, was it needs the yaw damping, and I think the new one will definitely have some. But the flight control system was, blatantly simple.
Absolutely.
I mean, absolutely simple. But then, when it did this rolling going up, that was it. It was a function, the yaw wasn't damped, so, you'd get yaw, and yaw induces roll. And and then finally, when they got out there where there's, the atmosphere is essentially gone, they can use the thrusters to get, kind of get the thing right side up again.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's the same kind of thing with the incremental approach. He did, the next flight went perfect. They figured it out, they fixed it, they went back and finally beat the X-15 altitude record after 42 years. Who would have ever thought those records would stand for that long? That says something about flight testing.
Yep.
Yeah. Still have the Mach, it's never been beat though. Nobody's ever beat Pete Knight 6.07 or 6.7.
Yep.
And anywhere near your guys, you, Walker, all over 6. So, yeah.
Yeah, I used to kid Pete Knight. I said, yeah, you got that speed record, but look what you had to do. You had to put all the fuel tanks on that airplane.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And he said it was really complex. He says, to try and jettison those things as a procedure was awful complex.
Yeah.
Awfully complex.
Yeah. Well, my wife, her favorite thing was that she was talking with Pete Knight's wife one time. It's like, well, how's it like to be married to the fastest man alive? Well, he wasn't that fast. I caught him. And it was so sad too, because we had there was a memorial service for Mike Adams. An Eagle Scout created a monument for Mike out at the crash site up near Ridgecrest, which was a real neat thing to do.
Yeah.
And we were out there for that ceremony and stuff when I was actually driving home and we found out that Pete had passed away that same day.
Yeah, when I saw him at the SCTP, he didn't look too good.
Yeah.
Yeah, he looked bad, bad shape.
Yeah.
But that was, the 100th anniversary of flight.
Yeah.
He didn't look too well.
Yeah. 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 The first day I interviewed him was interesting. It was the day he decided to run for mayor of Palmdale.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was taking phone calls all the time. I'd keep shutting down the interview and stuff because he's, well, okay, I'm going to do it, And so, yeah, that was an interesting time. Had some great guys. Your whole crew, all 12 of you guys, distinct, individual, but driven and pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to tell you about Bob Hoey. I don't know if he's talked to you about that, but Bob Hoey is still flying X-15s.
But he just pronounces it Hoy, Bob Hoy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, he's still flying X-15s. Did you know that?
Wait, remote controls.
Yeah. He was showing me some flights he's done with that, and it's pretty neat. Dropping it off with this other aircraft. That's pretty cool. So, yeah. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. We hope that eventually we're going to continue this program in some method or another. I have one other quick question. I know I want to let you get going here and stuff, but one of the things I'm doing is going up to the Air Force Museum. I've been there before. '64 stuff
Oh,
to see number 2 aircraft there.
Yeah, well, that's where the Hall of Fame is
Mhm.
located.
Yeah, I wish I could be there when you're going to be there in July, is it?
The induction, I think, is July 15th.
Okay, yeah, I wish I could get back there for that. But yeah, this trip I'm going back to because there's some other things I want to do. I want to do a good photo survey of the aircraft and things like that. And one of the things I'm trying to find out, if there's any way to do it, is to open up the cockpit and take a look inside the cockpit. Do you have any pull with anybody up there that might be possible?
As a matter of fact, I've never been in the Air Force Museum,
Oh, okay,
so I'm looking forward to it myself.
okay.
And then I got a call from the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum people,
Mhm.
and apparently they've been going through a renovation,
Mhm.
and what else? Renovation? They've been doing some big stuff, and they're going to have a gala opening in September.
Mhm.
And they said they have 30 artifacts that they're going to highlight, and they want to have someone representing.
Mhm.
And they wanted to know if I would be there and represent the X-15.
Mhm.
And I said, that sounds very interesting, I'd be delighted.
Mhm.
So I said, oh, they're going to be congressmen and all this sort of stuff. And what I think about congressmen these days, I'm not sure I'm going to interface with them. But anyway, and I haven't heard any more from him. He said, oh, that's great, we'll count it, and then you'll be hearing more from us. So I haven't heard anything more from that stuff until September.
Okay.
And apparently it's just a one
Yeah.
gala night affair,
Yeah.
black tie and all that jazz.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of the things I was always trying to find out, because some of the later pilots and stuff are always talking about certain things that have been done, like inside the cockpit and things like that. And I was always trying to get in to see what it actually looked like.
I've seen pictures of the cockpit
Mhm.
that was in the latest model X-15. That's the panel I'm completely unfamiliar with because
Mhm. Everything's changed.
We're
Yeah.
all changed.
Yeah. I know they had things like toward the end of the program and stuff where they had, I think it was Bob Rushworth had the first time when they had rebuilt the number 2 aircraft. And they had some problem with the landing gear, like the landing gear came out at Mach 4.2. And that was one of the things he said, that there was actually a plaque that somebody put in and stuck it in there, says, do not open landing gear above Mach 4.2. And I'd love to find out if it's still in there, so that, and I can't find anybody that would open up the cockpit for me, so one of these days we'll succeed in that, maybe, I hope. So, yeah.